Good afternoon. I'm not sure if we've got some people here yet or not, but hi from me, Stuart at Kineo, and Lars from Totara with me. Let's see. Oh yes, there's a few of you there already. Hi everybody. If you're just joining, please pop a message in the chat to say hi, and we'll know you're there. But I can see there's about 14, 15 people on already, and we'll give it another, I don't know, minute or so. Where are we? Couple of minutes, just to let people join with the session this afternoon. Hi, Alex. Yes, I'll just keep talking so people think there's something happening, I guess. Just again, welcome to the webinars this afternoon. We're just giving it a minute or so to let people give it time, because we're only just on half past the hour here now, so we'll just give people a moment to join. Hi, Roberto. Anyone else that wants to say a quick hello to let us know you're there, please do so in the chat. Hopefully it's nice enough and not too cold where you are. I don't know where people are joining from in the world. I'm down on the south coast here, and another cold day, but the snow's pretty much gone away down here, so there is that, and the sun's out, so it's getting better. Lars is on the other side of the South Downs, I think.
I am indeed, but I don't have the northern lights like you do. That's quite impressive.
These are the southern lights.
The southern lights, indeed. Yeah, I'm in Brighton in the UK, and just cold and dry at the minute, which is a blessing, since we've had plenty of rain. Which we like to complain about.
Oh, we're having some problems with sound there, Angie. Is anyone else having problems with sound? You just want to tell us you're okay or not in the chat, that'd be helpful. Sounds okay in Sheffield.
Okay. Looks like a local problem.
Yeah, apologies if you're not hearing us quite correctly. Hopefully it will get better.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we might sort of start making a little start, because we've just passed half past the hour now. Hi to Meta in Denmark. Winter darkness there. Yeah. I know how it's at that time of the year. I love Denmark. Great country. So we're not quite there. It's not quite dark here, but it will be dark probably by the time we finish the webinar. But listen, great to see people online, and please do use the chat or the Q&A to ask us questions as we go through. You want to this to be quite discussive and a little bit interactive today. And just to reintroduce myself, I'm Stuart Chadwick. I'm Managing Director of Kineo in the UK, Europe and Africa. I look after this bit of the world for our company. And alongside me, there's Lars. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello. Yes, I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Totara, and very delighted to be joining Kineo, who are one of our founding partners, in fact, of Totara. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and as you'll all notice from our photos on the opening slide there, lockdown has had its effects of both my hair and Lars's small beard that's growing there.
Indeed,
Lars of the hair.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think we've all had our own trials and tribulations, haven't we, over the past months?
Absolutely. Well, hopefully everyone's doing okay out there, and things will ease up, soonish. But great to see some people. So let's move on anyway. So this afternoon we're here to talk about really to talk a bit about the learning platforms market and the different flavors of things out there, and then particularly to move on to looking at talent experience and employee experience, which are more, I suppose, more emerging terms, and what they mean and why they're there at all. And Lars has joined us from Totara so that I can have a bit of a Q&A with him, basically, to explore that in the context of both the market, but more specifically Totara, as well as they're a business operating in that space with the Totara platform. So hopefully it should be interesting for everybody. And like I say, please do take part via the chat and the Q&A. And moving forward, that's a little agenda for this afternoon. And what I'm going to do just to start with is give a little bit of market context, because I think it will help to inform the discussion we're then going to have. So I'm going to move on to that and just spend a few minutes talking a little bit about the market and the terms in it. And then we'll move on to the discussion between myself and Lars. So I thought we'd take this slide to start with. This might be something that you've seen before. It's not new. It's been around for about a year and a half or so. This put out by Josh Burstyn at Deloitte. I really like it as a diagram or chart, because it not the least because it reflects my time in learning technology, which has been about the same time as this. So what we see here really is, as we went through from 1998 to present day, how different themes emerged in the learning space, in the HR space, which really were big shifts in the market along the way. So we start with the introduction of e-learning and blended solutions, move on to talent management, then continuous learning, then digital learning, onto learning in the flow of work on the right hand side there. And in each case, you can see in this chart what kind of thing we're talking about, the formats, and what underpinning learning philosophy was there, how the user approach to this, and the systems that underpinned it, which is, predominantly what we're here to talk about today. So, for example, the traditional learning management system, which I'm sure you're all semi-aware of or fully aware of, was born out of the need to deliver training. So, we had to get e-learning and face-to-face training out to people and manage that, and learning management systems were born to achieve that fundamentally. Yes, they've grown over time to do other things. So you'll see there that the learning management system was created as an e-learning platform and started managing face-to-face training as well. Then as we moved into talent management, where we were starting to be more considerate of learning pathways and career trajectories, and how they might be modelled through learning journeys. So the learning management system started to introduce some aspects of that talent journey. Continuous learning then emerged, which was about the fact that we're not just talking about one-off courses necessarily and programs of learning, but other pieces of content that start to come more into how we learn ongoing through our journeys in our businesses and roles and careers, even in some cases. And 70-20-10 crept in as a philosophy. And that was again reflected through an evolution of the learning management system into an experience place, where the learner now wasn't just accessing courses and programs which were directed at them, but started to interact with some other content that was there that could support my journey through learning and my career as well. Digital learning came along more recently as a term, sort of an evolution of some levels of e-learning really. We still have courses here, but they become more bite-sized through micro-learning. We start to see the introduction or reintroduction of video, and probably gamification creeps into here as well. Lots of resources and other assets that help, support learning, but also might support productivity or other things associated to the learning that we're doing. And that saw a further evolution again of learning management systems, where the idea was muted, that perhaps the learning management system became less visible, and actually we were just going direct to content. So we might launch a course off our intranet, and behind the scenes the learning management system might be tracking it, for example, or we were accessing resources. And actually, of course, mobile became much more prevalent, so whatever device we were on, people could access it via that. And then lastly, learning in the flow of work as the next evolution is taking that one step further to say, well, if we've got the ability to get to content regardless of the LMS, then can we embed that into our workflow in the same way that learning naturally works, when we're in the workplace? Because when we're trying to, go into performance management review, we might be talking to a colleague about, what have I got to remember to do in this review first? When it's online, I might be referring to a bite-sized piece of learning or a checklist of things that I need to work through. And so by putting those into our workflow through calendar events or Teams or Slack or elsewhere, we can make that learning more accessible and relevant to the point to which we are needing it. And that's what learning in the flow of work is all about. Now, all of these things, whilst at the top there it says we are here, at the top end, of course we're here because that's the last few years. And we're there in terms of evolution. It doesn't mean the stuff that preceded that has now become irrelevant, because actually all that stuff's still out there. We're still, we have clients that still have very traditional learning management system needs, where they are just hosting, tracking a few e-learning courses, for example, right the way through to that learning in the flow of work. So all of it still has relevance, I think it's worth saying. But it's that's more emerging end that we're perhaps going to talk a little bit more towards today. Just move my slide forward. So I'm going to start with all of you to get some interaction going. Just a bit of a poll. So given all the flavors of learning platforms that are out there, whether it's learning management system, learning experience platform, LRS, learning record store, employee experience learning, there's lots of different flavors now out there. And we were just kind of interested to see, do people get all this? Is this something that you understand, these terms and what they mean and how they might apply to your business? Or is this just confusing for you? So if you want to please just pick an option from this, we'll just give you 30 seconds and Michelle, who's helping us in the background, thanks Michelle, will let us know once we've got a decent number of responses, and then we'll look at how you got on. I'm kind of interested by this one because I know as an industry, we're very good at creating new terms for things and new acronyms, and that confuses us as let alone the market at times. So it's good to hear how people are perceiving it all. Pretty confusing seems to be the over. No one's been very confusing, which I'm pleased to see. So some are very clear. Yeah, okay, cool. That's probably roughly what I was thinking it might have came out like. I was expecting perhaps a few very confused people, but obviously we've got an audience that's got some experience here, which is great. So let's try and remove a bit of the confusion by showing you a confusing diagram to start with. So I'll explain. Some of you may well know of the Fosway Group, who are independent industry analysts in the learning technology field, who look into our markets and place us as suppliers in those markets on a variety of grids. And this particular one is the learning systems 9 grid, where different learning platforms or learning systems are mapped against both their potential and performance. And actually, all of the quadrants, there's more than 4, all of the boxes on this grid are relevant. That doesn't mean you're better or not by being in a different place necessarily, because it depends on the focus of your system actually to a large extent. But we've called out where Totara sits, and actually Totara moved to the right a bit this year, which was nice, and challenged it to leader in its space. And what Fosway are trying to do here is really just map out the platforms and systems that are on the market and give a sense of those. The key on the right gives some further explanation. And if you want to look at that, just go onto Fosway's website. All of these reports and grids are there freely. And there's a little article that we put out recently on the latest one, which we're looking at here, that came out a couple of weeks ago. All these links will be available in the copy of the slides that you get after this. Now, Fosway also talk about the market in terms of, as I'm going to show on the next slide, suites, specialists, and separately talent management. So they've said that the learning systems market, which used to be just learning management, as it's evolved in that journey that I just talked to you through, has started to diversify and create different categories. And they've tried to sort of group those categories to make some sense of that. And there's different ways you could do this, but I quite like this and find it quite a good way of looking at it. So the idea is that learning system suites are the bigger systems that try and do more things, is simply put. So they would include systems that have both traditional learning management, which includes mostly a focus on structured training, delivery, and reporting to go alongside that, although many other things along the way as well, alongside some of what we call the learning experience or next generation learning systems functionality, where the focus is more so on access to ranges of content and collaborative learning. So the top part of that is the stuff that was more on the left of the journey we looked at before, and the bottom parts was more on the right. And in these suites, you start to see these things coming together a bit, basically. And so therefore, it's either an evolution of the learning management system to take on some of that newer thinking, newer functionality, or indeed devolution, whatever the right word is, of the learning experience platform to capture some of that traditional learning management functionality to try and service that need as well. So it can come from either way around. The specialists, which is the next bucket, is they're not trying to do all that stuff in one big package. They're trying to do something much more specific. And they typically are on the right side of the previous chart that we talked through, is where they're introducing a focus purely on social learning or strongly on mobile learning, curating content. So, finding content, aggregating it together and making it accessible to the learner or curating it for their particular needs. Adaptive delivery, which is about making sure that the learning that I get access to is driven by my prior responses and needs to previous learning, a bit like the kind of, if you did this, you might like this type stuff. And then gamification comes in quite a lot in here as well, where you might get points or leaderboards or other forms of recognition for having taken part in learning. So we also get some more progressive technologies creeping in, like learning record stores, which is a way of capturing the data around learning and making that useful for the organisation to follow trends in learning and how that might be affecting performance management. Artificial intelligence can sometimes come in as well around areas like adaptive delivery or the curation of content, and chatbots pop up as well. But important, it's not that usual where an organisation will just have one of these without having perhaps some form of suite or other learning management as well, because the focus of these perhaps doesn't cover some of those areas which are still necessary in the business as way of managing our learning. And then on the right, it wasn't captured by the last diagram, but Fossway do have a separate grid to talk to this. Is you have pure talents management, which is it has learning focus and some crossover into learning systems, but it's much more broadly focused into areas to do with HR and people development. So you've got recruiting and onboarding, performance management, broadly L&D, compensation and succession planning. So those things start to come in a much bigger way in these systems. They're more specifically designed for it. But aspects of these things can also be found in those learning system suites. So for example, Totara's got stuff around objective planning or performance management, within its context of tools. And so it touches in some of those talent areas. So I hope that gives some sense to the type of systems which we've got out there and how they've evolved over the years. And that's going to leave us with a bit of groundwork to start a conversation now with Lars around what's happening now and next, and how's Totara responding to that. So I'm going to start off with a slightly step back question here, is that despite all that journey we've just been on, which has created a lot of evolution of the learning platforms market in its own right, we had this other layer that's come in over the last year, because as organizations have had to get very used to having home workers and not being out of the office space, that of course means that lots of stuff's gone online, as we are all now. And I'm wondering, Lars, that given that, how has that impacted that evolution of the learning systems, learning platforms market, and has it changed the relevance at all of learning platforms? And what's your view on that? So
undoubtedly, undoubtedly, it's made significant impact in how people have been trying to use existing technology that they have, understanding whether it's scaled appropriately. Has it been brittle or has it been flexible? And we've been really tested, I think, emotionally, but also in terms of our infrastructures as organizations by this big shift to remote working by and large, and also just the disruption that we've experienced, certainly larger organizations where you've got different types of job roles, not just ones where you're knowledge workers. The disruption is quite extensive. In fact, every single sector is being affected in this way. But it's not just this past year. I think there's been underlying disrupting trends throughout this, the past 5-10 years, if you care to look back. And the primary one is the broad category of all technology. So we're talking about learning technology and HR technology today, but all aspects of technology and the whole digitalization transformation program has really bedded in pretty much every sector. So it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, that effect is getting more and more profound. And with the pandemic, that shifted us immediately to take advantage of a whole bunch of communications and collaboration tools like the ones we're using today, and try and find better ways of working with it. But that was always there, and now I think we're more broadly recognizing some of the benefits of remote working in ways that we weren't appreciating before. And it's going to change how we use office space. It's going to change how organizations are structured as well. And one of the other disruptors that we've identified at Totara is your definition of what your workforce is no longer just your employees. It's a much more blended or extended workforce that you need to be thinking of. And so how your learning platforms support not just your immediate people, but also your contractors, your resellers, your sales channels, even your customers directly in terms of educating them and sustaining loyalty is really critical. to that. So the idea of a hybrid workforce is I think something that's coming to the fore, and that we need ways to support and maintain that. And we'll cover this shortly, but the whole skills challenge, with all of this change and uncertainty, how on earth are we going to encourage people or support people in acquiring skills for job roles and that don't even exist yet? They're not even properly defined.
One of the things I found interesting when Lars and I were talking earlier in the week was what he had a story, I don't know if you want to share, Lars, about a scaling up need, and I think it was one of your clients in Italy.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And we saw that at Totara quite across the board, across our partner network. It's quite humbling, in fact, that in healthcare, where there's been a huge response to the pandemic effort. There's one case in Italy, there's an Italian healthcare institute. Just in 1 month, back in April or March, April time, they had to move from serving 40,000 healthcare professionals, which is a sizable audience, to 450,000 healthcare professionals across the country as they scrambled to provide ventilator training and other types of medical support. And it's a good example of where the technology base was available, that was flexible and adaptable enough to support such a shift, and of such a response that you need to have. And the pandemic, there's plenty of stories. We've had them in Australia, in the UK, with the NHS as well, where Totara has managed to support them. It's not been the issue. That's a good thing. The technology hasn't been the problem. You can focus on the real issues that you're dealing with. That hasn't been universally true. There's been plenty of other stories of where the infrastructure has broken, and so there's been a mad scramble to try and find alternatives.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because people who are less familiar with the technical end of it that we all have to do, we deal with as suppliers, is it's not as simple as just saying, well, I'll put another 50,000 people into this thing. When you get into large numbers, it can have an impact. So, and people have obviously had to respond to that very quickly at the moment, but it's something to be aware of, I guess. And I know you've got a couple of there was a couple of slides you wanted to talk to Lars around this sort of point as well. So I'm just going to click forward a bit. Oh, there we go. So I think here you're reflecting on how that expectation shift has been happening, as part of the pandemic, but regardless, actually, anyway.
That's right. And so again, this is one of the key trends, I think, that's been happening anyway, and it's just been catalyzed by the current pandemic experience that we're living through. But the shift in priorities as employees or as people working in organizations has started, or has been shifting over the past decade, really, or probably even longer, where the past priorities of really being focused on well, everyone focuses on having a job, but the experience of that has been your management experience has been a focus perhaps more on weaknesses and addressing those rather than sort of developing your strengths. That it's about your relationship with your manager, which is quite a hierarchical command and control structure, which is still very prevalent today. There's thinking about how satisfied I am, and that's quite a loose, uncontrollable thing, which we'll talk a bit more on in a bit. And then my rewards, my paycheck. So the expectation pendulum has sort of shifted over to a focus on realizing that work and life has not just become more blended, it's sort of intertwined, and we've been thrown into the deep end of this significantly right now and had to address that. But underlying that, there's been this, I think, recognition amongst certainly younger people coming through in the workforce, that they're looking for purpose, aligning their own sense of purpose with the organizations that they want to work with, that they're constantly looking for opportunities to develop themselves, and that there's a slow shift, I think, from just expecting that to come from a third party, like a company, and taking more ownership over that, which is a good thing when it comes to learning outcomes. You want to be properly motivated to do that. And that seeing your peers and seeing others around you as coach mentors is a more dominant and more, I think, successful way to sort of help people stay motivated and really productive. And that naturally means that you're looking at strengths, and that you're looking at building cross-functional teams that are built out of people who are really exercising those strengths.
Yeah, but I don't know if people in the audience have recognised that shift in yourselves. I mean, like I say, do throw up anything it's on your mind in the chat, but it certainly resonates with me and the conversations we're having even in our own business. That's we're part of the wider Sitting Guilds group, and we talk a lot about some of these points. So no, that resonates, Lars. Thank you. And another point sort of associated to that, I suppose, is that alongside that shift, we're in the midst of this sort of changing world and what that means in terms of skills development. And that's not a new thing, because over the last couple of years or more, and there's been a lot of analysis of the automation of job roles, like, for example, which are creating the need for new and different skills, and seeing some roles decline whilst other ones increase. The hope is that there's actually more roles out there than there are now, but they're going to be different, and therefore we have to sort of evolve and skills and training and development to support that, and to match those new needs. But again, to me, this seems to be an area which has been really brought to the forefront over the last 10 months, as we've seen some organizations, some industries sadly really suffer because of the lockdowns, and others thrive. So that's creating changes in people's roles, people being made redundant who now need to find themselves in perhaps whole new careers. And yeah, I just wondered what your view is on that. And
yeah, so I mean, this slide just lists out what the World Economic Forum sees as the top 10 skills that we all, I can probably say that, all of us need to look at ways to develop, because they're the ones that are going to be increasingly in demand. And just highlighted on there, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. And boy, haven't we been tested on that over the past months. But that's not going to go away, because we will get through the pandemic, and there'll be other things. There's other disruptive forces just down the track, which we're just going to need to be more adaptable in our response to. But the challenge, the scale of the challenge in that report, if you take a look at it, essentially they're saying that in the next 10 years, so just 2030, that's 10 years, next decade, about 1 billion people are estimated to need to really shift their skill sets over to stay relevant. And that's a huge ask. That's a huge transitional ask. So, I think we all play, as in our sector, an increasingly important and strategic role in facilitating that.
Yeah, agreed. And a little bit of a plug on one level, but the Sitting Guilds, which we're part of, as plays strongly in this space. It's an organisation which is all about skills development, and actually we've just put out a report in the last week or so about building bridges in skills. So recognising that I may no longer have a job in the airline industry because it's suffering and I can't be a steward anymore. But the skills I've got there can be transferably relevant to something else entirely, perhaps with a bit of bridging. And that's an area that we've been exploring a lot. And like you say, learning technology can absolutely play a role in accessing that journey, and recognizing here's the skills you've got now, and here's the ones that you're going to need for job X. And that's what the talent part of these systems is in part trying to address. And we can plug the gap, if you like, with pieces of learning aligned to that talent journey. Okay, thanks, Lars. Next question, as we just been mentioning talent, is, I think this is an interesting one. We've got these quite similar-ish terms emerging: the talent experience, employee experience, and of course learning experience. So how do these things mean kind of the same thing? Do they mean different things? What's your take on this, Lars?
Well, back to what you were saying earlier, we do like to confuse, don't we, as a function, actually. We all have our terminology, but it is quite loose. I mean, the talent experience is another phrase. It's one that we've adopted and looking to really define carefully. But the employee experience is probably the broadest one. If you look at it historically, it's that end-to-end cycle from attraction, attracting employees towards your organization, and then all the way through to offboarding, that whole life cycle and everything in between. And the talent experience, and we'll talk to this a little bit more, is I think that key focus of what is what you're doing when you are at work. So when you are working, you are usually interacting with other people. You know, you're trying to be productive, and all of that experience that you're gathering is actually contributing to your learning, whether you call it that or not. And so that's the key distinction, I think, in certainly us as learning, you know, professionals in trying to support audiences in organizations, is to recognize that as an experience, that working experience, is something that we can influence very, very carefully. And that learning experience is probably, well, it is more in narrow definition, I'd say, to the specific perhaps learning programs or mix of media that you're putting together to deliver something that will be engaging, will be able to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
back in
sense.
the work.
And I saw even, you know, people picked up, but Microsoft has just launched a big new product, Viva, which they call an employee experience platform, which builds on functionality already in Teams and some other bits and pieces they've got with some new stuff alongside it. And they're looking at that in that holistic way you've just described, is they're saying where the employee experience embodies learning, wellness, performance, access to information, etc. They've kind of captured those various things and pulled it together. But they also recognise that what they're doing isn't everything. It hasn't got, you know, loads of learning management functionality in there, for example. But nonetheless, I thought it was a really exciting move and you know, kind of well thought through in trying to draw together those different areas.
Yeah, indeed, and you know, it's interesting. You know, there's a lot of recognition. I think, you know, Totara, we've been busy developing this for some time and have got quite a rich and deep integrated solution, which we'll have a little closer dive into a bit later around it. But you know, it's all very complementary, both with an I and an E, in terms of how the moves of Microsoft, which is embedded in many organizations around the world. Totara is very complementary to that because it integrates very well with Teams, and there's actually a natural, Viva's sort of a natural extension, arguably, of Teams in many respects, and there'll be more to learn, I think, about it as the months go by. But yeah,
and
it's an interesting
that move to
step.
integrate with Teams, driven by that, when we were looking at the diagram earlier of Burston's journey through, you know, learning themes and developments, and we got that right to that right hand side about bringing in the workflow piece. Is that what you were sort of aiming to address there?
Well, absolutely. I think what we're trying to address, I think, is what motivates people at work and where are people working. And increasingly, it's recognized that, you know, we're using collaboration tools, lots of different types of collaboration tools, but some are more dominant than others. So not every organization is a Microsoft house, for example, but certainly they need collaboration tools built into the very fabric of their organization to work in the way that we've just been describing, you know, in more remote virtual teams. Essentially, you can't really do it without that type of functionality available. So it's a natural step for us, and anyone who's sort of actively trying to support an effective workplace experience is that you've got to go where people are doing things and getting work done, and to be able to surface learning, to be able to surface development opportunities and engagement, collaborative opportunities in those channels, then you know, then that's where it's going to be making an effective difference to the performance and productivity of the individual and the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. We may have touched on some of this already, Lars, but there was a couple of bits in here. I think there was a story you wanted to share around this Campbell's one on the left there.
That's right. This goes back a while. It's not a brand new case study, but it was one of the first ones that recognized that employee experience matters. And so when we say employee experience, that is the broader term. So what's it like working at a large organization, typically a larger organization, but it applies to any size. But you know, that experience really does define the success or otherwise of the organization as a whole. And Douglas Conant, who came in as the CEO at Campbell's, he recognized this because when he did come in, at the time, Campbell's was recognized as one of the worst places for corporate culture back then. And he came in and recognized that they're not going to be able to survive in their sector and in their industry. As that quote says, you can't win in the marketplace unless you win in the workplace. So it took 8 years for him to turn that culture totally round to one where the engaged to disengaged employee ratio shifted. I mean, quite dramatically, as you can see from the comparative statistic there, from the normal world-class metric of, you have 12 engaged employees for every one disengaged employee. They managed to achieve, double that really, with 23 employees against one disengaged employee. That's a huge transformation, and it led to their turnaround as an organization as well in terms of the benefits. And if you actually look at the business metrics that this does shift the dial on, which Stu, if you want to move on to the next slide.
Okay, sure.
This isn't just about touchy-feely things, I mean, that's crucial. And in fact, I think we've all recognized that more than ever right now, with the real problems with mental health and well-being, because we've all been thrown into remote working in ways that we're just not prepared for in many cases.
I just lost you a minute there, Lars. I don't know if everyone else is okay, or it's just me.
I can hear you fine. I'm not sure if it might be your end. Shall I carry on?
Oh, you're back.
Okay, good. I'll carry on then.
It might be me.
Yeah, all right. So essentially what I was saying is that the business metrics that you now see on the screen, you can see that those companies that have invested in employee experience are dramatically more successful, especially in the areas of profit and productivity per employee. When people are motivated, happy and motivated and focused in what they're doing, then stands to reason that would make a positive difference. So, not investing in those is frankly, going to mean that your organization is going to suffer and become increasingly less competitive. So, and in the environment we're in now, that and the rate at which that can impact your business, it could be the meaning, it could be the death knell. I mean, just look what's going on in the retail sector. You've got some really sailing above, and they've, there's obviously some key strategic reasons why that would be, but other parts of that is their culture was very united and strong, and they were innovating in the right way at the right time to be resilient, given what has been this, massive shift for them. Whereas others who are, just milking their situation, arguably, focused on efficiency and not effectiveness, they're the ones that have basically gone out of business now. So this matters.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super important. But it's like, as you recognise, the shift. I think years back it was just less of a focus for organisations. It was almost like you kind of got away with it, or just on one level. But you can't now. Clearly,
No,
you
have
to have that in mind.
Mm-hmm. You have to, and if you look back, or if you just hark back to what we were talking about in expectations.
Pause again. Must be perhaps my connection's a little slow.
Expectations. Yeah, I think Stu's you're free. Okay. What we're doing. All good. Okay, great. I'll carry on talking if you can hear me, Stu.
Yeah, so I think bizarrely my connection, having been fine all day, is just been annoying now, which is not the way it goes when you're doing this stuff live. But hey, that's what we're here to do. So when we've started sort of picking up on this point already around the problems businesses are facing, but I don't know if you want to sort of build on that further, really, as a point where Totara's been evolving as a product. Totara started with learning management and has sort of grown out of that progressively over the years. And so I wondered what it is that's really driving the evolution at the moment, and if you want to talk to that a little bit, and I'll see if I can get my internet connection working better while you're doing it.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you want to flick onto the next slide for support that, but I think what we've been saying is we're here to address that big skills challenge. And I think we're all now agreed, I hope, that that this needs more unity and alignment in the activities that we're doing. So it's not just about learning unilaterally, or it's not just about employee satisfaction unilaterally. And yet, as this slide talks to, many organizations are structured in quite siloed ways, and HR functions within organizations often end up being quite siloed. So you can often see separate teams, competing for retention of us as an individual worker. Planning and development programs pop up, internal communications campaigns come through. You've got to do pulse surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, performance management requirements, and then you've got your management priorities, which may actually be quite separate. Sometimes, if the culture is probably dysfunctional, then their priorities are going to be different from what they're mandated to do, arguably. And then you've got the leadership initiatives that sail right over the top. So that might resonate with some in the audience. I don't know what you're feeling, but if it is like that, there's a high chance that any one individual is going to have quite a frustrating experience. There's a lot. You're introducing friction into their day, and it's very frustrating to have to deal with that. You can't get a lot of work done. I mean, just think about the complaints that you've seen in the news over the previous months about end-to-end Zoom calls, no gaps between the meetings.
That sounds very familiar.
And the blurring of the workday, which has been incredibly, is difficult to manage unless you think it through carefully and use the right tools in the right way to sort of manage that. Otherwise, it can be quite and is damaging to people.
Well, let's see if people recognize that. So, if you're part of an HR function, or even if you're not, how does it feel like it's siloed to you in the way that Lars has just described? So just a yes, partially, or no question, if you wouldn't mind just putting an answer in, and we'll give it 30 seconds or so. But yes, a lot of what you described there, we see a lot of Lars, and when we're dealing with our clients, and I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? They've become progressively more complex functions, HR, and needing to work more progressively, more closely with the business. But it's something you have to make. It has to work effectively. It has to be joined up.
It does, and I think there's some organisations are recognising, more enlightened, I guess, have recognised the role that people play in being that organisation, and that they're not just a sort of a piece of an asset to really use efficiently. You can't do that with people. It needs to be much more nuanced than that and supported.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for responding. And I think the one of the no's is Dan in the chat, who said that they're a small HR organisation, so in their business, so it's almost impossible to have a silo. Yeah, absolutely. It's
true.
Smaller. Our business isn't that big, so we're aware of that one. But certainly for we've seen here from perhaps people in medium or larger size organisations that there's at least a partial siloing in there, and slightly more people saying that they recognise this. So certainly a challenge to overcome. Moving on, talent experience again.
So when we talk about what is it we're trying to achieve, so if we're in a current state of perhaps not being that joined up, so what is it we're trying to move towards? And so this is really trying to paint a picture of what a true talent experience could be from an individual's perspective. So in technology and when we develop things, we talk about user experience. So we're thinking carefully about what that every step of the way, what does it feel like when you're using a particular app, say, or a phone or whatever that tool might be. But if we think of the workplace experience like that, then what does that look like? So this virtuous cycle that I put on the screen here is one that we should aspire towards, which is underpinned by having aligned, congruent communication and processes in place to really support that. So imagine that you have access to resources that will keep you upskilled on your desired topics, but also the ones that are relevant to your job, which hopefully that's already aligned because you're actively working in your role, in a role that you love, want to develop in. That you do feel valued and listened to by your manager, that you feel part of a cohesive team that collaborates well, that you've got access to the right resources, that you can create and share and collaborate those with resources in a valued way, and that you are recognized and praised, and also comfortable with constructive feedback, when you need it, when you have it, and that there is a clarity around the goals that you're working towards as a company, as a team, and right down to your own individual goals. So it's probably a utopian sort of statement, really, for many organizations at this time, but it's the way we need to go, because if we don't, we're going to lose talented people to other organizations who are going to be heading much faster towards this model.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think to bring this back to the system itself, what does that look like in a system? Of course, in this case, we're talking about Totara specifically, and the talent experience platform that you've released with Totara 13 a few months ago. How does that play out in that? I mean, this is what this diagram's showing clearly.
Yeah, indeed. Well, this is just another way of describing that virtuous cycle. Is almost like the outcomes you want to see flowing through each of these intersected circles that you see. Now, just to explain what those circles are, this is aimed at addressing what motivates people at work, and there's been research that's been done in this over the past 25 years, and there's something called self-determination theory, and some of you may well know of it. It was popularized or brought together in a great book, which is written by Daniel Pink, called Drive. It was written about 10 years ago, but don't let that put you off. It's actually extremely relevant. And what that characterizes the motivations to be is as mastery, which is about learning, developing your skills, constantly honing them and getting better at them. And that's extremely satisfying curve to be on. That you have a space and a psychological safety, shall we say, to exercise those skills, and that's called autonomy. So you feel like you've got the space to do that. You can make decisions, you can challenge, shall we say, authority in productive ways, and comfortable with that, and the culture supports that. That's extremely satisfying and motivating. And then purpose, that we're doing all of this in a context with groups of people and an organization in an industry that we want to make a difference in, and that all aligns. The organization's purpose and your own individual values do align. Now, all of those three things need support in an organization, and you need tools and an infrastructure to achieve that. So that's what we've done, is bring together learning management, the ability to support collaboration and engagement with your people, and also performance management, both in terms of traditional and continuous feedback, which moving people towards a more coach-mentor style culture. And the opportunity, I'd say, is that with this type of system in place, you've got a natural opportunity to migrate to that aligned experience that we were just looking at. So you can see how information and processes and methods can flow between these three things in a much more congruent way than they can do with separate systems operated in separate ways. So that's what we think we've got something very powerful here, that will affect not just superior learning outcomes, but you'll have more motivated people and a more productive organization. And as we think and have just been talking to, that future, which is the next 10 years imminent, we need to have resilience, we need to have adaptability, we need to be flexible, and we can't do that without doing something like this.
Yeah, that shift's happened, hasn't it? Now the shift has taken place, so now we need to everything you've just been talking about in particular. No, it's real now, and therefore you can't not, I think, embrace it a bit, really. So maybe that just maybe we've move on to this poll, because we were interested in, having described that, is how people in the audience now perceive that in terms of what you're doing in your organization. So we've got learning, you can pick more than one thing here, actually. There's learning and skills development, engagement through collaboration, and performance focused culture. So there's those areas we were just looking at there. Now, which of those, it could be all of them, might one of them, might none of them, are relevant for you in your organisation and are you seeking to address? Thanks for contributing. And if you've got anything you want to share in the chat, about specific areas that you're looking at or experiences you've had, please do share. Yeah, they all. If I look at our own organisation, I'd be ticking all three. I think they're all relevant in different proportions. I think, yeah, no.
Well, I think that's really the recognition. I'd be interested to see what people.
Yeah, okay. Well, all three in there as we probably expected, but yeah, a little bit more focus on learning and skills development, which, I guess that feels right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, another way of phrasing this question, maybe another time, would be, in terms of an audience to a session like this, is how connected do you feel with probably colleagues elsewhere in an HR function, and that talks to how siloed it might be, or how much interaction there actually is between people who focus on learning, people who focus on engagement or collaboration, and those who focus on performance.
Absolutely. I think this was the last question I had, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So, given all of this, okay, we've listened to this story. It sounds like something we need to engage with as an organisation, and we can see how that might manifest through a platform. But actually, where do I start here? If I want to get on this journey a bit more than I am already, if I want to move on from my traditional approach to learning and start embracing that more holistic employee and talent experience.
Well, the obvious first step is to obviously give you a call, Stu, isn't it?
That wasn't my intention of that question.
And ask for a demo of the Totara Talent Experience platform, of course. But actually, aside from that, as learning professionals, how do you make those first steps? Because often it's quite difficult, because you may not feel like you've got that authority or voice even to sort of start making those changes. So, I mean, one thing I'd like to put forward as a tangible thing that you can move towards is building out what I call, but McKinsey have defined as an intentional learning culture. So, I think we have a slide on that, Stu, maybe to just look at. So, essentially, what that means is, if you're focusing on an intentional learning culture, it basically gives you a structure that is aligned towards throughout, getting effective outcomes. So hopefully this is not brand new to most of you on this call, but often these steps are missing when designing a learning experience or any type of learning program that's there. So that would be my first step, is to say that any requests or any proactive requirement that you're meeting in your organization is that you structure it so that it is designed in these ways. So you set small and clear goals throughout the learning experience, and that they are goals that are completely aligned to something practical and actionable, so that you're building experience back in the workplace, that you give people time and space, that you don't have the distractions, and that includes and means aligning their manager and team members so that there's space to get on with some learning. But actually it's easier to do that if you've already aligned that to actual real work outcomes. And that you actively seek feedback, so you build that into the experience. So you build 360 sort of feedback loops all the way through. You're deliberately practicing the skills, so the learning is action learning based. Do look that up. That's if you're not aware of it, but it's about real problem solving, putting learning in a real problem solving context, and that there's opportunity and space to reflect, because that reflection is often missing. We're just talking about back-to-back Zoom calls. There's no chance for a reflection from meeting to meeting. So no wonder people aren't feeling productive. No wonder you get burnout. No wonder you don't get effective learning outcomes from your training, because there's no opportunity to sort of really deeply embed it cognitively. So those 5 steps, if you just put those up and then check your designs and of your programs and just see if you can tick each of those 5, then I think you'll be doing well.
Great, thanks, Lars. really, really good advice. So listen, how long we've got left? Less than 2 minutes. We've been talking for quite a while. So, I think everyone's been listening attentively, not too much in the chat yet. But if you have any questions about what we've just been discussing or otherwise, then please do take the opportunity to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A function. Thank you, Zach. It's kind of you. I know it's quite a lot to take in. We've kind of covered quite a lot of territory now. I'm hoping it's given people a bit more of a sense of all of this. Really, I think that was part of our intention. Is that, you know, I say that the nature of learning in businesses is evolving, and that focus of what's happening with the learner and the wider context of their employee experience, and how that journey's sort of shaped the platform's market and the technology in it. And we've given you a bit of flavour of, you know, some of the things that are playing in that space now. So I hope that's made it a little bit clearer, because it seems to us that it's a little bit of a confused market now, and not as straightforward as it once was. And that's what we were partly hoping to address through this, really, and show you that, you know, there is some logic to it, hopefully. But, you know, probably something that people need to seek advice on if you're not super clear on it or not sure where you sit within it.
Yeah, I just add one more point about that you can take action on, and that is when you are making purchasing decisions about infrastructure and learning technology, or HR technology, or any technology for that matter, make sure it has some flexibility and you have some control over it, because whatever your business needs are now and how you define them will change. And they, you know, it used to be say a 12 or even 2-year time horizon. That shortened to a year, it's shortened to 6 months, it's quarterly now probably, or in fact during the pandemic it's been daily, if not weekly, that you've had to contend with something dramatically different. So if you're hamstrung with the decisions that you made, either technically you can't change or commercially you can't do so either, then you're in, you know, that's not a good place to be. And I think several organizations have come unstuck because of that. But if you have that flexibility, you're far more likely to be able to respond positively to that change.
Yeah, thanks, Lars. Really, really good point. Thank you, Dan, for the positive feedback in the chat there as well. Well, as we haven't got any questions sort of popping through, hopefully that's been really informative for you. And, you know, just a final slide then to just thank you, everybody, for joining us. You don't have to try and remember everything we've just talked about, because you're going to get a recording and some slides. So if you want to, you know, go back over any of this stuff, you'll have it there to go through. And there's also a link there to another webinar that Lars did on talent experience and talent management, which talks to those areas a bit further. And there's a report about workplace disruptors, where we were talking earlier on about, you know, the shifts in the landscape, and particularly over the last 9 to 10 months of the world that we've all been experiencing. And you know, there's a good report there which we will make available as well, which you can find out a bit more about that and some of the solutions to tackling that more specifically, because we like to be solutions focused. It's great to talk about the theory and what's going on out there, but ultimately, you know, you need to turn that into reality, and, you know, that report gives you some advice in that respect. And I guess lastly as well, if there are themes in here you want to discuss further, just informally, not no end game really. Just we're really happy to discuss this stuff. We find it really interesting and like to discuss it with organisations to see what's going on there, because that helps inform us and hopefully helps you along the way as well. So please do drop us a line at Kineo or get in touch with Totara and Lars. And other than that, you know, massive thanks to Lars for joining us this afternoon and answering my various questions, and to everybody who's, you know, taking time to join us and watch our webinar today.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for everyone's attention.
Great, thanks all. So we're going to roll up and have a good rest of your day. Take care out there, and I'll continue to disappear into the northern lights as it gets progressively darker where I am. Yeah. And so yes, enjoy yourselves, everyone, and I hope to see you on another webinar soon. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.